If you want to see a man truly break, watch him kneel before the woman society told him he could never deserve. I'm going to tell you a story about a marriage that began with a contract and ended with something far more dangerous. Stay until the end, because what Clara Whitmore discovered on her wedding night wasn't just a man behind the mask. It was a truth that would either destroy her or set her free. The morning of Clara Whitmore's wedding arrived without fanfare. No church bells, no flower arrangements that cost more than a carriage. Just the raw November wind scraping against the windows of her father's crumbling townhouse in the East End, where the wallpaper peeled like dead skin and the servants had been let go months ago. She stood before a cracked mirror in her bedroom, fastening the buttons of a cream-colored dress that had belonged to her mother. It wasn't a wedding gown. It was practical. Honest. The kind of dress you wore when you understood exactly what you were trading and refused to pretend otherwise. Her younger sister Emma sat on the edge of the bed, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. "You don't have to do this," Emma whispered. Clara met her sister's eyes in the reflection. "Yes, I do. He's old enough to be your father. He's 39. That's hardly ancient. He's a monster, Clara. Everyone says so. They say he drove his first wife to madness. They say he locked her in the East Wing until she—" "Stop!" Clara's voice cut clean through the room. "Don't repeat gossip like it's gospel." Emma's face crumpled. "Then why are you marrying him?" Clara turned from the mirror. "Because father gambled away everything we had. Because the creditors are coming for this house next week. Because you're 17 and deserve a season without having to sell yourself to the first man who'll pay off our debts." The words landed heavy. Emma looked down at her lap. "What about what you deserve?" she asked quietly. Clara had no answer for that. She'd stopped thinking about what she deserved around the same time she'd started counting the days until the bailiffs arrived. A knock echoed from downstairs. The carriage had arrived. The Duke of Ashcombe did not attend his own wedding. Clara stood in the small chapel beside his solicitor, a thin man named Mr. Pemberton, who smelled like pipe tobacco and spoke in the clipped, efficient tones of someone who'd done this before. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. There were no guests, no vows exchanged, just signatures on parchment and a gold ring that felt too heavy on her finger. "His Grace sends his apologies," Pemberton said as he gathered the documents. "He was detained by urgent business on the estate." Clara almost laughed. Her husband couldn't even be bothered to show up. "When does he expect me?" "This evening. The carriage will take you directly to Ashcombe Manor. And if I refuse?" Pemberton's expression didn't change. "Then you'll be the Duchess of Ashcombe, who abandoned her post on her wedding day. I suspect that would make for interesting conversation in the drawing rooms." He was right, of course. She'd already signed her name. The deal was done. The carriage ride north took 6 hours. Clara watched the city fade into countryside. Then countryside into something wilder, dense forests and rolling hills that seemed to swallow the light. By the time they reached the estate, the sun had set completely, leaving only the pale glow of a winter moon. Ashcombe Manor rose from the landscape like something carved from stone and spite. It was enormous, brutal in its architecture, all sharp angles and dark windows. No warm lights in the parlor, no servants waiting at the entrance, just cold, indifferent silence. The carriage stopped. The driver opened the door without a word. Clara stepped out into the freezing air and felt the weight of the place settle over her like a shroud. The front door opened. A woman appeared, tall, severe, dressed in black. The housekeeper. "Mrs. Dalton," the woman said. "Follow me." Clara followed her through hallways that echoed with each footstep, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge her for breathing. The house smelled like old wood and something else. Grief, maybe, or just the particular scent of a place where joy had been absent for too long. They stopped outside a set of double doors. "The Duke's study," Mrs. Dalton said. "He's expecting you." Then she left. No instructions, no encouragement, just the sound of her footsteps disappearing down the corridor. Clara stood alone in the hallway, staring at those doors. On the other side was the man she'd married, the man she'd never met, the man the entire world called a tyrant. She pushed the doors open. Os. Leonard Ashcombe stood with his back to her, staring into the fireplace. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and dark hair threaded with gray. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. The silence stretched. Clara counted to 10, then 20. Finally she spoke. "Your Grace." He turned. The first thing she noticed was his face. Not handsome in the soft, romantic way the poets wrote about. Handsome in the way a cliff face is striking, all hard lines and uncompromising edges. His eyes were dark, almost black in the firelight, and they regarded her with the kind of cold assessment usually reserved for livestock purchases. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "it's Mrs. Ashcombe now. Or Duchess, if you prefer formality." Something flickered across his expression. Not quite amusement, not quite disdain. "You're younger than I expected." "I'm 21. Your solicitor had my birth date. Numbers on paper don't translate to reality." He crossed the room to a side table and poured himself a drink. "Brandy." He didn't offer her one. "You're aware of the terms of our arrangement?" "I am." "Good. Then there won't be any confusion." He took a long swallow. "You'll have your own quarters in the West Wing. We'll maintain separate households. You're free to redecorate, hire whatever staff you need, attend whatever social functions you choose. I only require 3 things. First, discretion. Whatever you think of me, you'll keep it to yourself in public. Second, heirs. 2, preferably. After that, you're released from marital obligations. Third, don't ask me about my first wife. The last one landed like a blade." Clara held his gaze. "And what do I get in return?" "Everything you asked for, your father's debts erased, your sister's dowry secured, a title, wealth, security, just not a husband." His jaw tightened. "You knew what you were agreeing to." "I did, but I didn't expect to be treated like a piece of furniture." "Then you had unrealistic expectations. The words were meant to cut." They did. But Clara had spent the last 3 years watching her father drink himself into oblivion and her mother waste away from illness. She'd buried one parent and managed the other's slow collapse. She wasn't easily intimidated. She took a step closer. "Let me be clear, Your Grace. I didn't marry you for love. I'm not some naive girl expecting roses and poetry. But I also didn't marry you to be ignored. If you want discretion and heirs, fine. But you'll treat me with the basic respect you'd offer a stranger on the street. Otherwise, this arrangement ends badly for both of us." Leonard stared at her. For a long moment, she thought he might throw her out, tell her to pack her things and leave. Instead, he set down his glass. "You have more spine than I gave you credit for. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one." He moved past her toward the door. "Mrs. Dalton will show you to your rooms. We'll discuss household matters in the morning." He was halfway into the hall when Clara spoke again. "Why did you marry me?" He stopped. Didn't turn around. "Because I needed a wife, and you needed money. It's not complicated. Then why not marry someone from your own circle? Someone who already knows how to play these games? Because they all knew my first wife. And I'm tired of seeing her ghost in every drawing room." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Before Clara could respond, he was gone. Tots. Her rooms were beautiful. That was the worst part. They'd clearly been prepared with care. Fresh flowers on the vanity, a fire already burning in the hearth, silk drapes in deep emerald green. The bed was enormous, draped in blankets that looked softer than anything she'd ever owned. There was even a writing desk by the window, stocked with fresh paper and ink. It was a gilded cage designed by someone who understood exactly what kind of cage she'd agreed to inhabit. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and let the reality of it settle over her. This was her life now. This cold house. This distant man. This transaction masquerading as marriage. She didn't cry. She'd used up all her tears when her mother died. Instead, she unpacked her single trunk, her mother's dress, a few books, her sister's last letter, and tried to imagine a future where this felt like home. A knock at the door startled her. "Come in." Mrs. Dalton entered carrying a tray. "I've brought you tea and something to eat. You've had a long journey." "Thank you." The housekeeper set the tray on the desk, then turned to leave. "Mrs. Dalton?" The woman paused. "How long have you worked here?" 23 years, since before the Duke inherited the title. "Then you knew his first wife." Mrs. Dalton's expression closed like a door. "I knew her. What was she like?" A long silence, then, "Fragile, beautiful, completely unsuited for this life." "And him? What's he like when there's no one watching?" The housekeeper's eyes softened, just barely. "Lonely," she said. "So lonely it's turned him to stone." Then she was gone. Clara sat alone with her tea, staring into the fire, trying to reconcile the man downstairs with the one Mrs. Dalton described. She didn't see Leonard for 3 days. The house operated around her like a machine. Servants appeared and disappeared without sound. Meals were delivered to her rooms on schedule. Mrs. Dalton provided updates on household matters, guest lists for upcoming events, budgets for renovations, schedules for staff. Clara was treated like a duchess in every practical sense, but she was utterly, completely alone. On the fourth morning, she decided she was done waiting. She found him in the stables. He was grooming a black stallion, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms roped with muscle. He worked with steady, practiced movements, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked almost at peace. Clara stood in the doorway, watching. "If you're here to complain about the accommodations," he said without looking up, "you'll find Mrs. Dalton more sympathetic. I'm here because my husband has been avoiding me for 3 days. I've been managing the estate. You've been hiding." His hand stilled on the brush. "Excuse me?" Clara stepped into the stable. "You made it very clear that this is a business arrangement." "Fine. But even business partners communicate. I've been sitting in that house like a ghost while you pretend I don't exist." Leonard turned to face her fully. "What exactly do you want from me? I want to know what I'm supposed to do here. I want to know if I'm expected to host dinners, or attend events, or sit quietly in my room until you need an heir. I want to know if you plan to acknowledge my existence in public, or if I'm some dirty secret you're ashamed of." Her voice had risen. She hadn't meant for it to, but the isolation of the past few days had cracked something open. Leonard set down the brush. "You're not a secret. You're my wife. Then act like it." "What does that mean?" "It means stop treating me like I'm made of glass. Stop assuming I'll break if you speak to me directly. I didn't come here expecting romance, but I also didn't come here to be erased." The stallion shifted in the stall, uneasy with the tension. Leonard exhaled slowly. "You're right. I've been unfair." Clara blinked. She hadn't expected that. "I don't know how to do this," he continued. "The marriage, the proximity. I spent 5 years alone after Margaret died, and I got used to it. Too used to it. Margaret. His first wife." The name landed heavy between them. What happened to her? Leonard's expression shuddered. "I told you not to ask about that. And I told you I'm not a piece of furniture. If we're going to live in the same house, I deserve to know what ghosts I'm competing with. You're not competing with anyone. Then why does it feel like I am?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the horse. "She was sick," he said quietly. "In her mind. It started small, melancholy, sleeplessness. But it got worse. She started seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices. She'd lock herself in her rooms for days. The doctors tried everything. Laudanum, bloodletting, prayer. Nothing worked. His voice was flat, clinical, like he was reciting facts from a ledger. The night she died, she walked out onto the roof during a storm. I found her standing on the edge. I tried to talk her down, but she wouldn't listen. She said I'd trapped her in a prison, that she'd rather die than spend another day as my wife." Clara's breath caught. "I reached for her," Leonard continued. She stepped back, and then she was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Don't be." He picked up the brush again, resuming his work. "It wasn't your fault. Do people blame you? Of course they do. A young woman dies under mysterious circumstances, and her husband is the obvious villain. The fact that I didn't attend social functions or remarry only confirmed their suspicions. Leonard Ashcombe, the tyrant who drove his wife to suicide. Is that what happened?" "No." He met her eyes. "I failed her, but I didn't kill her." Clara believed him. She didn't know why, but she did. "Why did you marry me then, if you knew what people would say?" "Because I'm tired of ghosts. And because you didn't look at me like I was a monster when we signed those papers. You looked at me like I was just a man making a deal. It was the first honest thing I'd experienced in years." The confession settled between them like new snow. Clara took a breath. "I'm not her. I'm not fragile. I won't break." "I know. Then stop trying to protect me from yourself." Leonard studied her, something shifting in his expression. "All right, no more avoiding you. Good. But I'm still not sharing my rooms." Clara almost smiled. "I didn't ask you to." Things changed after that. Slowly, but they changed. Leonard started joining her for dinner. They didn't talk much at first, just the necessary pleasantries, discussions of estate business, brief updates on upcoming social obligations. But gradually, the silences between them became less hostile, less like walls and more like pauses. 2 weeks after her arrival, they attended their first public event together, a ball hosted by the Earl of Wentworth. Clara had dreaded it. She knew what the gossip would be: the young gold digger and the grieving widower, the fortune hunter who'd trapped a duke. She was right. The moment they entered the ballroom, the whispers started. Women hid behind their fans, eyes sharp with judgment. Men smirked knowingly, like they'd already written the ending to her story. Leonard felt her tense beside him. "Ignore them," he murmured. "Easy for you to say. They're not calling you a whore." His hand tightened on her arm. "If anyone speaks to you that way, tell me their name. And what will you do? Challenge them to a duel?" "If necessary." She looked up at him, startled. He wasn't joking. They made it through the receiving line. Champagne appeared in their hands. The orchestra played something light and forgettable. And then Lady Pemberton approached, a woman in her 50s with a smile like a knife. "Your Grace," she cooed, "how lovely to see you out in society again, and this must be your new bride." "The Duchess of Ashcombe," Leonard said evenly. "Of course." Lady Pemberton turned to Clara, her eyes scanning her dress, her jewelry, cataloging every detail. "How are you finding Ashcombe Manor, my dear? I imagine it's quite a change from wherever it is you came from." The insult was barely veiled. Clara smiled. "It's certainly larger than what I'm used to, but I'm managing. It helps that my husband has been so patient with me." Lady Pemberton's smile tightened. "I'm sure he has. Though I must say the manor has been terribly quiet since Margaret passed. She was such a vibrant presence, always hosting the most wonderful gatherings." "Margaret wouldn't have lasted an hour in your company," Leonard said coldly. "She had standards." The words cut clean through the room. Lady Pemberton's face went red. "Excuse me? You heard me. Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have better places to be." He steered Clara away before she could respond. They made it to the terrace before Clara let out the breath she'd been holding. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. She'll spread that story all over London." "Good. Let her." Leonard turned to face her. "I meant what I said earlier. If anyone disrespects you, I'll hear about it." "Why?" "Because you're my wife. That means something." It was the first time he'd said it like he meant it. The winter deepened. Snow came early that year, blanketing the estate in white silence. Clara found herself falling into the rhythms of the house. Morning walks through the garden, afternoons in the library, evenings by the fire in the drawing room where Leonard would read while she wrote letters to Emma. They weren't friends. Not yet. But they weren't strangers anymore either. One night, Clara came downstairs late, unable to sleep. She found Leonard in the study, bent over paperwork, a single lamp burning beside him. "You should be in bed," she said from the doorway. "So should you." She stepped inside. "Can't sleep. Too cold." He frowned. "The fires should be lit in your rooms." "They are, but the blankets aren't thick enough." Without a word, Leonard stood and crossed to a cabinet. He pulled out a heavy woolen blanket, dark green, well worn, and handed it to her. This was Margaret's. She was always cold too. Clara hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He met her eyes. "She'd want you to use it." She took the blanket, feeling the weight of it in her arms. "Thank you." Leonard nodded. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "If you need anything else, tell me. Don't suffer in silence. I won't." She turned to leave, then paused. "Leonard?" "Yes?" "This arrangement we have, do you regret it?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "No." "Do you?" Clara thought about it. About the cold house and the cruel whispers and the loneliness that clung to everything like frost. "Not yet," she said honestly. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "Good." That night, wrapped in Margaret's blanket, Clara finally slept soundly, and for the first time since arriving at Ashcombe Manor, she didn't dream of leaving. But in the east wing of the house, in rooms that had been locked since Margaret's death, something stirred. A door that should have been sealed creaked open, and in the morning, Clara would wake to find a single white rose on her pillow, tied with black ribbon. The same flowers that had been placed on Margaret's grave the day she died. Clara stared at the white rose on her pillow like it was a serpent coiled to strike. The black ribbon gleamed in the morning light. Fresh petals. No dust. Someone had been in her room while she slept, close enough to hear her breathing, close enough to touch her face if they'd wanted to. She picked it up with shaking fingers. The stem had been cut clean, professional. This wasn't some servant's mistake or a piece of old decor that had fallen from a shelf. This was deliberate. Her door had been locked. She'd checked it twice before bed, the way she'd checked every door since arriving at this house. Clara dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy on the buttons. She wrapped Margaret's blanket around her shoulders, some part of her still seeking comfort in the dead woman's things, and went to find Leonard. She found him in the breakfast room, reading correspondence over black coffee. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him set down his cup immediately. What happened? It wasn't a question. It was a command for information. Clara placed the rose on the table between them. Leonard went very still. The kind of still that predators go before they attack. Where did you find this? On my pillow. This morning. My door was locked. His jaw tightened. Are you certain? I checked it twice. Someone was in my room while I was sleeping. Leonard stood, the chair scraping loud against the floor. He crossed to the servant's bell and rang it hard enough that Clara heard the echo through the house. Mrs. Dalton appeared within seconds, her face carefully neutral. Your Grace. Who has keys to the Duchess's chambers? Only myself and the head housemaid, Your Grace, as per your instructions. And where were you last night between midnight and dawn? In my quarters. I retired at 11 and didn't leave until 6 this morning to oversee breakfast preparations. The head housemaid? Mrs. Dalton's expression flickered. Sarah's been with us for 8 years, Your Grace. She's never... I didn't ask for character references. Where was she? A pause. In the servants' wing. She shares a room with 2 of the kitchen girls. They can confirm she didn't leave. Leonard picked up the rose. Someone entered my wife's room while she slept and left this on her pillow. I want every servant in this house questioned. I want to know who had access to the East Wing last night, and I want the locks on the Duchess's doors changed immediately. The East Wing. The words landed heavy. That was where Margaret had lived, where she'd died. Mrs. Dalton's face paled. Your Grace, the East Wing has been sealed for 5 years. No one goes there. Then explain this. He held up the rose. The black ribbon caught the light. Mrs. Dalton said nothing, but Clara saw something flicker across her expression. Not confusion, recognition. You've seen this before, Clara said quietly. The housekeeper's silence was answer enough. Leonard's voice went cold. Mrs. Dalton, if you know something, speak now. The older woman's hands twisted in her apron. The night before Lady Margaret died, she received flowers just like this. White roses with black ribbons. They appeared in her rooms for 3 days straight. She became convinced someone was trying to drive her mad. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and then... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Leonard's expression was carved from ice. Who sent them? We never found out. The staff was questioned, but no one admitted to it. Lady Margaret was already fragile by then. The doctors said it was just another symptom of her condition. Paranoia. Delusions. Clara's stomach turned. And you didn't think to mention this when I arrived? Mrs. Dalton looked at her directly for the first time. I thought the past was buried, Your Grace. I didn't think it would follow you, but it has, Leonard said flatly. Which means someone in this house wants my wife to know she's not safe here. He turned to Clara. Pack a bag. You're not sleeping in those rooms tonight. Where am I supposed to go? My chambers. Until we find out who's doing this, you stay where I can see you. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist she wasn't some fragile thing that needed protecting. But the memory of waking to find that rose inches from her face killed the protest before it formed. Fine. Leonard looked at Mrs. Dalton. I want a list of every person who's entered this house in the last month. Guests, tradesmen, everyone. And I want it by noon. Yes, Your Grace. And Mrs. Dalton, if I find out you've been withholding information to protect someone's reputation, you'll be gone by evening. The housekeeper's face went white. She curtsied and left without another word. Clara waited until they were alone. You think someone on the staff is doing this? I think someone wants you to believe you're going mad the same way Margaret did. Whether that's a servant with a grudge or something else entirely, I don't know yet, but I'm not taking chances. What if it's not a person? What if it's... Don't. His voice cut sharp. Don't start believing in ghosts. That's how they win. They, not it. He was still thinking in terms of human enemies. Clara wasn't so sure anymore. She went back to her rooms to pack, and this time Leonard came with her. He stood in the doorway while she gathered her things, his eyes scanning every corner like he expected someone to materialize from the shadows. When she opened the wardrobe, she found another rose. This one tucked between her dresses, the black ribbon tied in a perfect bow. Clara's hand shook as she pulled it out. Leonard was beside her in 2 strides. He took the rose, examined it with cold precision, then crossed to the fireplace and threw it in. They both watched it burn. "Pack faster," he said. Leonard's chambers were in the south wing, as far from the east as the house allowed. The rooms were larger than Clara's had been, masculine, sparse, with dark wood furniture and heavy curtains that blocked out most of the light. There was a sitting area, a study, and a bedroom dominated by a 4-poster bed that could have fit 4 people comfortably. Clara set her bag down, suddenly aware of how intimate this was. She'd been in his presence for weeks now, but always with space between them. Rooms, hallways, the careful distance of a business arrangement. Now there was just a bed and the understanding that they'd be sharing these walls until the threat was dealt with. "I'll sleep in the study," Leonard said, reading her hesitation. "You take the bedroom. That's not necessary." "It is." He was already moving to gather blankets from a chest. "This isn't about proximity. It's about safety. The study has a clear line of sight to the bedroom door. If anyone tries to enter, I'll know." Clara watched him make up a makeshift bed on the leather sofa. The Duke of Ashcombe, one of the wealthiest men in England, preparing to sleep on furniture because his wife was being terrorized by white roses. "Thank you," she said quietly. He paused. "Don't thank me for doing the bare minimum. It's not the bare minimum. You could have dismissed this as hysteria. Most men would have." "I'm not most men. And you're not hysterical." He met her eyes. "Someone is trying to frighten you. I intend to find out who and make them regret it." The certainty in his voice was almost comforting. Almost. That night, Clara lay awake in Leonard's bed, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about Margaret, about whether the dead woman had lain in this same bed, staring at these same shadows, feeling the walls close in. She must have made some sound because Leonard appeared in the doorway. "Can't sleep?" Clara sat up. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that rose." He stepped into the room, keeping a respectful distance. "It's designed to do that. To make you afraid in your own home. Don't give them the satisfaction." "Easy to say." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "When Margaret was at her worst, I used to sit with her until she fell asleep. She said the silence was louder than screaming. Clara understood that. The house was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. "Will you stay?" The words came out before she could stop them. "Just until I fall asleep." She expected him to refuse, to remind her of the boundaries they'd established. Instead, he pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat. "I'll be here." Clara lay back down, pulling the blankets to her chin. The presence of another person, solid, real, breathing, made the darkness less oppressive. "Tell me something," she said. "Something true." "Like what?" "Why you really stopped attending social functions after Margaret died." Leonard was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I couldn't stand the way they looked at me. Like I was a curiosity, a tragedy. Everyone wanted to know the details, how she died, what I'd said, whether I'd tried to stop her. They turned her death into entertainment, so I stopped giving them the show." "Did you love her?" "I tried to. She deserved someone who could. But I was 28, and arrogant, and thought I could fix her with enough patience. By the time I realized she didn't need fixing, she needed help I couldn't provide. It was too late." His voice carried the weight of old guilt, the kind that didn't fade with time. "You couldn't have saved her," Clara said. "Maybe not, but I could have tried harder to understand her instead of trying to solve her like she was a problem to be managed." The honesty cut through the dark. Clara's eyes grew heavy. The last thing she remembered was the sound of Leonard's breathing, steady and even, and the knowledge that for tonight at least, she wasn't alone. Mom. The interrogations began at dawn. Leonard questioned every servant personally. He was methodical, precise, giving nothing away in his expression. Clara watched from the study, seeing the way people flinched when he spoke, the way his silence was more terrifying than any threat. By midday, they had nothing. No one admitted to entering her rooms. No one had seen anything unusual. The head housemaid wept through her entire interview, swearing on her mother's grave that she'd never betray the household. Either someone's lying, Leonard said when they were alone again, or we're dealing with someone who knows this house well enough to move through it unseen. Like who? He didn't answer immediately. Then, there's a network of servants' passages built into the walls. Most of them haven't been used in decades. But they're still there, show me. Leonard led her through the house to a section of paneling in the library. He pressed something Clara couldn't see, and a section of wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage thick with dust and cobwebs. These run throughout the manor, he said, mostly between the main rooms and the servants' quarters. The old Duke had them installed so the staff could move without being seen by guests. Clara peered into the darkness. Does anyone still use them? Not that I'm aware of. But if someone wanted to access your rooms without being noticed, this would be how. We need to check them. All of them. Leonard looked at her. That will take days. Then we start now. They did. Armed with lamps and a crude map Leonard sketched from memory, they began exploring the passages. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and decay. Their footsteps echoed strangely, like the walls were listening. Most passages were empty, dust thick enough to show that no one had walked there in years. But when they reached the section behind the east wing, they found footprints, fresh ones. Leonard crouched, examining them. Small. Could be a woman or a young man. Clara's skin prickled. The prints led deeper into the passage, toward the sealed rooms where Margaret had lived. We should turn back, she said. No. We finished this. They followed the footprints to a door Clara recognized, the entrance to Margaret's old chambers. It was locked, but the dust around the handle had been disturbed recently. Leonard produced a key ring and tried several before finding one that fit. The lock turned with a shriek of metal on metal. The door swung open. Margaret's rooms were exactly as she'd left them. Furniture covered in white sheets, curtains drawn, the air thick with abandonment. But on the vanity, fresh and grotesque, sat a vase full of white roses tied with black ribbons. Dozens of them. Clara's breath stopped. Leonard moved through the room with controlled fury, checking corners, looking for any sign of who'd been there. He found more roses on the bed, on the writing desk, scattered across the floor like some sick parody of romance. This is a message, he said flatly. What kind of message? That whoever's doing this knows about Margaret, knows how she died, and wants you to follow the same path. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. Why? What did I do? You married me. That's enough. Leonard crossed to the vanity and swept the roses onto the floor with one violent motion. Glass shattered, water spread across the hardwood. He stood there breathing hard, and Clara saw something in him that frightened her, not because it was violent, but because it was barely controlled. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. I failed Margaret because I didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. I won't make that mistake with you. I'm not her. I know. His eyes met hers. You're stronger. That's why I chose you. But strength won't protect you if someone's determined to break you. Then what will? Me. The word hung between them like a vow. They sealed the passages that night. Leonard hired men from the village, people with no connection to the household staff, and had them brick up every entrance they could find. It took 3 days of constant work, but by the end, the hidden network was inaccessible. The roses stopped. For a week, there was peace. Clara began to relax, to sleep without startling awake at every sound. She and Leonard fell into a new rhythm, still separate in most ways, but bound by the shared experience of being hunted in their own home. Then the invitations started arriving. The winter season was beginning. Every noble family in England was hosting balls, dinners, gatherings designed to showcase wealth and power, and every single one wanted the Duke and Duchess of Ashcombe in attendance. We should decline, Clara said, reading through the stack of embossed cards. We can't. Leonard was reviewing estate accounts at his desk. If we hide, it confirms every rumor about us. We need to be seen, together, stable. I'm not stable. I'm terrified someone's going to leave flowers in my soup. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I'll check your soup personally. This isn't funny. I know. He set down his pen. But hiding won't solve this. Whoever's targeting you wants you isolated and afraid. The best way to fight that is to refuse to disappear. He was right. Clara hated that he was right. Fine. But if Lady Pemberton so much as looks at me wrong, I'm throwing wine in her face. Fair enough. They attended the Earl of Wentworth's winter ball first. Clara wore emerald silk that matched her eyes and jewelry Leonard had given her without ceremony the night before. Diamonds that had belonged to his mother, not Margaret. A deliberate choice. The ballroom went silent when they entered. Clara felt every eye on her, cataloging every detail. The whispers started immediately. She caught fragments: young, gold digger, replacement, poor Margaret, and her spine stiffened. Leonard's hand found the small of her back. Steady. They made it through the receiving line. Champagne appeared. The orchestra played. And then the jackals descended. Lady Pemberton was first, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Your Grace, how wonderful to see you both. I was just telling the Marchioness about your lovely home. Though I must say, I was surprised to hear you've been doing renovations. I thought Margaret's rooms were meant to be left as a memorial." The implication was clear. Clara was erasing the first wife's memory. Before Clara could respond, Leonard spoke. "My first wife is buried in the family crypt with full honors. That's her memorial. The East Wing is being converted into a music room for the Duchess. Margaret would have approved. She loved music." The lie was smooth as silk. Lady Pemberton's smile tightened. "Of course. How modern of you." She drifted away, already whispering to her companions. More vultures circled. Lord Hastings, who made a pointed comment about May-December marriages. The Dowager Countess of Bristol, who asked Clara if she found the age difference challenging. Each barb designed to draw blood without being overt enough to warrant direct confrontation. Clara endured it with gritted teeth. This was the price of the title. This was what she'd signed up for. Then Marcus Ashcombe arrived. Leonard's cousin was younger than the Duke by 5 years, handsome in a soft, forgettable way. He had the kind of charm that came from never being told no. He crossed the ballroom with the confidence of someone who believed he belonged everywhere. "Leonard," he called out warmly, "and this must be your beautiful bride." He took Clara's hand and kissed it before she could pull away. Leonard's expression went flat. "Marcus." "Cousin?" Marcus grinned. "I was devastated to miss the wedding. Business in France, you understand. But I'm here now, and I must say, the rumors don't do her justice." "What rumors?" Clara asked coolly. "That my cousin married a fortune hunter young enough to be his daughter." Marcus's smile never wavered. "But I can see now you're much more than that. You must be very clever." The insult was wrapped in compliment. Clara felt Leonard tense beside her. "My wife is extremely clever," Leonard said quietly. "Clever enough to recognize false flattery." Marcus laughed. "Always so serious, cousin. I meant no offense. I'm simply delighted to see you happy again after poor Margaret's tragic end." He said her name like a weapon. Clara saw the muscle jump in Leonard's jaw, saw his hands flex at his sides. This was deliberate provocation. "Margaret's death was a tragedy," Clara said before Leonard could respond. "But I'm not interested in discussing my husband's first marriage with someone I just met." Marcus's eyes glittered. "Of course. Forgive me. It's just that Margaret and I were quite close before she married Leonard. I suppose I still feel protective of her memory." The implication was poisonous. That Marcus had been more than a friend to Margaret, that Leonard had stolen her, that Clara was repeating history. Leonard moved so fast Clara almost didn't see it. One moment Marcus was standing there smiling. The next, Leonard had him by the arm, gripped tight enough to leave marks. "Walk with me," Leonard said. It wasn't a request. He steered Marcus toward the terrace before the man could protest. Clara started to follow, but Mrs. Dalton appeared at her elbow. The housekeeper had accompanied them as a chaperone, and gently held her back. "Let him handle this, Your Grace. What's Marcus doing?" "Making trouble. It's what he does best." Through the terrace doors, Clara watched the two men face off. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Leonard's body language. Controlled fury barely leashed. Saw Marcus smirk and say something that made Leonard's fist clench. Then Leonard leaned in close and spoke directly into Marcus's ear. Whatever he said made the color drain from his cousin's face. Marcus left the ball 10 minutes later without saying goodbye to anyone. When Leonard returned, his expression was carved from ice. "What did you say to him?" Clara asked. "That if he ever speaks Margaret's name in your presence again, I'll ruin him so thoroughly he'll wish he'd never been born." Clara believed him. They left the ball early. The carriage ride home was silent, tense. Clara watched Leonard stare out the window, his jaw tight, and recognized the signs of a man barely holding himself together. When they arrived at the manor, he went straight to his study and poured himself a drink. Then another. Clara followed him. Talk to me. There's nothing to say. Marcus knew Margaret. That's not nothing. Leonard drained his glass. Everyone knew Margaret. She was beautiful and tragic and exactly the kind of woman men write poetry about. Marcus included. Were they lovers? The question landed heavy. No. Leonard set down the glass with careful precision. But he wanted to be. He made that very clear before we married. I ignored him. Margaret ignored him. So he spent 5 years nursing a grudge and waiting for an opportunity to twist the knife. And tonight, he found one. Tonight, he found you. Leonard turned to face her. He knows exactly what buttons to push. He'll spread rumors that our marriage is a mockery of what I had with Margaret. That you're a poor replacement. That I'm dishonoring her memory by being with you. Let him talk. It's not that simple. Leonard's voice was tired. Marcus has influence, money, friends in Parliament. If he decides to make you his target, he can make your life hell. Then we make his life hell first. Leonard looked at her sharply. Clara stepped closer. You said whoever's doing this wants me isolated and afraid. Marcus wants the same thing. So we don't give him the satisfaction. We show everyone that this marriage is solid, that I'm not going anywhere. And how exactly do we do that? We stop pretending this is just a business arrangement. We make it look like a real marriage. The words hung between them. Leonard studied her face. You're suggesting we lie. I'm suggesting we adapt. You said I was clever. Let me be clever. We attend every event together. We touch in public. We smile at each other like we're actually fond of each other instead of tolerating each other. We give them a story so convincing they forget to look for cracks. And in private, nothing changes. But out there, we're a united front. Leonard was silent for a long moment. Then, you do that? Pretend to care about me for the sake of appearances? Clara met his eyes. I'm not sure I'd be pretending. The admission surprised them both. Leonard's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded flickering across his features before he locked it down again. All right, he said quietly. We try it your way. The transformation was gradual but deliberate. They began appearing together at every social function. Leonard's hand would rest on Clara's waist with possessive ease. She'd lean into him when they spoke to others, her fingers finding his arm naturally. They'd exchange glances across crowded rooms, small, intimate moments that spoke of shared understanding. It was all performance, carefully choreographed, but somewhere along the way the lines blurred. Clara found herself seeking his presence when she was anxious. Leonard started asking her opinion on estate matters. They fell into the habit of sharing late-night tea in the study, talking about everything and nothing until the fire burned low. The tone noticed. The whispers changed. Instead of mockery, there was grudging respect. Instead of scandal, there was fascination. The cold duke had thawed. The fortune hunter had won his heart. It was a story too good not to believe. But Marcus wasn't finished. 3 weeks into their campaign of respectability, Clara received a letter. Plain envelope, no return address. She opened it in the privacy of Leonard's chambers. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 lines written in elegant script. Ask your husband what really happened the night Margaret died. Ask him why he was in the village when she fell. Ask him who he was with. Clara's hand shook as she read it, and read it again. Leonard found her sitting on the bed, staring at the letter like it might catch fire. What is it? She handed it to him without speaking. His expression went cold, then colder. This is Marcus's work. Is it true? Leonard looked at her. Is what true? Were you in the village the night Margaret died? The pause before he answered told her everything. Yes. Clara's heart sank. Who were you with? A doctor. I was trying to find someone who could help Margaret. She'd been getting worse, and the physicians in London said there was nothing more they could do. I heard about a specialist in the village, someone who'd worked with patients like her. I went to convince him to come to the manor. Did he come? No. He said Margaret was beyond his help. By the time I got back, she was already on the roof. The guilt in his voice was crushing. Clara stood and crossed to him. You didn't kill her. I left her alone when she needed me most. You were trying to save her. I was running away. Leonard's voice cracked. I couldn't stand watching her destroy herself anymore. So I left, and she died, and every single person who whispered that I drove her to it was right. The confession broke something open between them. Clara took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. You didn't drive her to anything. She was sick, and you did everything you could. It wasn't enough. It never is. But that doesn't make you a monster." His eyes searched hers, desperate and lost. Then Clara did something she'd promised herself she wouldn't do, something that crossed every boundary they'd established. She kissed him. It was meant to be comfort, reassurance. But the moment their lips touched, everything changed. Leonard went rigid with shock. Then his hands were in her hair, and he was kissing her back with 5 years of loneliness and hunger and need. They broke apart, breathing hard. "Clara," Leonard started. Don't apologize. Don't tell me this was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake." His voice was rough. "But it changes everything. I know. We can't go back. I don't want to." Leonard stared at her like she was something impossible. Then he kissed her again, slower this time, deliberate. And Clara understood with perfect clarity that they'd just crossed a line there was no retreating from. The arrangement was over. The marriage had begun. And somewhere in the shadows of Ashcombe Manor, someone was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy them both. The kiss changed everything, and Leonard knew it the moment he pulled away from Clara's lips and saw the way she looked at him, like he was a man worth saving instead of a title worth enduring. They stood in the dim light of his chambers, breathing hard, the space between them charged with something neither of them knew how to name. 5 years of careful isolation, shattered in a single moment of weakness. Or maybe it wasn't weakness at all. Maybe it was the first honest thing either of them had done since signing those papers. "We should talk about this," Leonard said. Clara's hand was still on his chest. "About what? About how we just destroyed our own arrangement? About how everything we agreed to doesn't matter anymore? It matters." "Does it?" She stepped back and he felt the loss of her warmth like a physical blow. "Because I'm not sure I can go back to pretending this is just business. Not after that. I don't want you to." The admission hung between them like exposed wire. "Then what do you want?" Leonard looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who'd walked into his life with nothing but debts and determination, who'd faced down society's cruelty without flinching, who'd somehow made this cold house feel less like a mausoleum. He saw the future he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. "You," he said simply. "I want you." Clara's eyes searched his face for the lie, the escape clause, the inevitable betrayal. She didn't find it. "Then have me." She kissed him again, and this time there was no hesitation, no careful distance. Just need and hunger and the reckless certainty that they were both falling into something they couldn't control. They didn't make it to the bed, didn't make it past the desperate press of bodies against the wall, hands searching, mouths claiming. And when Leonard finally carried her to the mattress, it wasn't the clinical transaction they'd agreed to. It was messy and real and terrifyingly intimate. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets, Clara's head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. The fire had burned low. Outside, snow had started to fall. "What happens now?" Clara whispered. "Now we deal with Marcus. And whoever else wants to destroy us." He felt her tense. "Do you think Marcus sent the roses?" Leonard had been asking himself the same question. "I think Marcus is capable of anything if it serves his interests. But the roses started before he showed up at the ball. Someone else planted that seed. Who? I don't know, but we're going to find out." He said it with more certainty than he felt. Because the truth was, Leonard had enemies. Years of ruthless business dealings, political maneuvering, and social isolation had left a trail of people who'd be happy to see him suffer. Narrowing down the list would take time they might not have. Clara's breathing had evened out. She was asleep, exhausted from weeks of fear and the weight of what they'd just done. Leonard stayed awake, watching the shadows move across the ceiling, and wondered if he'd just made the best decision of his life or signed her death warrant. He got his answer 3 days later. The scandal broke like a dam bursting. It started with whispers at Lady Hastings' luncheon. Clara wasn't there, but Mrs. Dalton heard it from a maid whose cousin worked in the Hastings household. By evening, it had spread through every drawing room in London. The Duchess of Ashcombe was not the innocent victim she pretended to be. She was a manipulator who targeted Leonard deliberately, seduced him with calculated precision, and was now bleeding his estate dry while carrying on an affair with his own cousin. The accusations were specific, detailed, backed by supposed evidence that Marcus had conveniently compiled and distributed through carefully chosen channels. There were forged letters supposedly written by Clara to Marcus, discussing their scheme. There were testimonies from servants who swore they'd seen Clara and Marcus alone together. There were financial records allegedly showing Clara making unauthorized withdrawals from estate accounts and funneling money to mysterious recipients. None of it was true. All of it was believable enough to stick. Leonard found out when Lord Wentworth arrived at the manor unannounced, his face grim. "We need to talk," Wentworth said without preamble. "Privately." They went to the study. Leonard poured whiskey with steady hands while Wentworth paced. "How bad is it?" Leonard asked. "Bad. The entire ton is talking. Marcus has been making the rounds, playing the concerned cousin trying to protect the family name. He's built a narrative that's damn near airtight. Claire's being framed." "I believe you. But belief doesn't matter when half of London's elite thinks your wife is a fortune hunter who's making a fool of you. Let them think what they want." Wentworth stopped pacing. "Leonard, they're calling for you to annul the marriage. They're saying she's unfit to be a duchess. If you don't act, the scandal will destroy both of you. Then it destroys both of us." Leonard's voice was flat. "I'm not throwing her to the wolves because Marcus manufactured a lie. Even if staying silent ruins your reputation, your political connections, your business interests?" "Yes." Wentworth stared at him like he'd announced plans to burn down Parliament. "You love her." It wasn't a question. Leonard didn't answer. Didn't need to. "Christ," Wentworth breathed. "You actually love her. Does it matter? It's the only thing that does. Because if you're willing to burn everything for her, you need to make damn sure she's worth the ashes. She is." Wentworth shook his head slowly. "Then you'd better have a plan, because Marcus isn't going to stop until one of you is destroyed." After Wentworth left, Leonard sat alone in the study and felt the weight of every choice he'd made since Margaret's death pressing down like stone. He'd spent 5 years building walls, and Clara had dismantled them in weeks. Now those walls were gone, and he was exposed in ways that terrified him. He found Clara in his library reading, or pretending to read. Her hands were shaking too much to turn the pages. "You've heard," she said without looking up. Leonard sat beside her. "Every word." "Then you know what they're saying, that I'm a whore, a thief, a liar. I know what Marcus is saying." She finally met his eyes. "Will you believe him?" The question gutted him, that she even had to ask. That 5 years of his own paranoia and isolation had created a world where she couldn't trust his faith in her, was a failure he'd carry forever. "No," he said. "I won't." "Why not?" "The evidence is convincing. Everyone else believes it." "Because I know you." Leonard took her hand. "I know how you take your tea. I know you write to your sister every Sunday. I know you hate small talk and love thunderstorms, and you're terrified of horses, but you'd never admit it. I know you, Clara, and I know this is Marcus's poison, not your truth." Her eyes filled. "What if knowing me isn't enough? What if they force you to choose?" "Then I choose you." The words came easy, too easy, like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. Clara's breath hitched. "You'd sacrifice everything?" "I'd sacrifice anything." He meant it, and that terrified him more than any scandal ever could. Because Leonard Ashcombe had spent his entire adult life in control of his estate, his emotions, his future. Now he was handing that control to a woman he'd married for convenience and was keeping because he couldn't imagine breathing without her. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed. The sound echoed through empty hallways like a countdown. "We need proof," Clara said, her voice steadier now. "Proof that Marcus is lying. He'll have covered his tracks. Then we find where he slipped. Nobody's that careful." Leonard studied her face and saw the steel beneath the fear. This was the woman who'd walked into his house with nothing and demanded respect, who'd faced down society's cruelty and refused to break, who was even now planning their counterattack instead of collapsing under the weight of false accusations. He'd married her thinking she needed protection. He was starting to realize she might be the one protecting him. They worked through the night, combing through every detail of Marcus's accusations. Clara read the forged letters with clinical precision, pointing out inconsistencies in the handwriting, anachronisms in the dates. Leonard cross-referenced the financial records and found discrepancies that proved they'd been altered. But proof of forgery wasn't enough. They needed motive. They needed to show why Marcus would orchestrate something this elaborate. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Dalton knocked on the study door at 3 a.m. Leonard almost sent her away until he saw her expression. Your Grace, there's something you need to see." She handed Leonard a letter, old, yellowed with age, sealed with wax that had cracked decades ago. "I found it in the East Wing," Mrs. Dalton said quietly, "behind one of the loose panels. I think Lady Margaret hid it there before she died." Leonard broke the seal and read. His face went white. "What is it?" Clara asked. He handed her the letter without speaking. It was from Margaret, written 2 days before her death, addressed to Leonard but never delivered. The words were shaky, disjointed, the writing of someone barely holding on to sanity. But the message was clear. "Marcus came to me again today. He says you don't love me, that you married me for the estate, that he would have cherished me the way you never could. He brings me flowers, white roses with black ribbons, and says they're a symbol of mourning for what we could have been. I know he's trying to poison me against you, but the flowers keep appearing no matter how many times I burn them. He has keys to the house. He knows the servants' passages. He wants me to believe I'm going mad, so I'll run to him for comfort. I won't give him the satisfaction. But Leonard, I'm so tired. So tired of fighting him, of fighting myself. If something happens to me, know that it wasn't you who failed me. It was him. It was always him." The letter ended there. No signature. Just the desperate scrawl of a woman who knew she was drowning. Clara's hands shook as she lowered the paper. "Marcus killed her." "Not directly," Leonard said. His voice was hollow. "He drove her to it, slowly, deliberately. He made her believe she was losing her mind so she'd be vulnerable. And when I left that night to find help, he probably thought she'd finally break and turn to him. Instead, she chose the roof." "Why would he do that?" Leonard's laugh was bitter. "Because Margaret was supposed to be his. I stole her when I proposed. Marcus has spent every day since punishing me for it, first by destroying her, now by trying to destroy you." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The roses, the campaign of terror designed to isolate Clara and make her doubt her own sanity. The public accusations meant to turn Leonard against her. It was the same playbook Marcus had used on Margaret, refined and weaponized. "We have to take this to the authorities," Clara said. "It won't matter." Leonard set the letter down carefully, like it might disintegrate. "This is Margaret's word against a dead man's reputation. There's no concrete proof Marcus did anything criminal, just a letter from a woman everyone believed was mad. Then we make him confess." "How?" Clara's eyes were hard. "We give him what he wants. We make him think he's won." The plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. They would stage a public confrontation. Leonard would announce his intention to annul the marriage, citing Clara's supposed infidelity with Marcus. He would play the cuckolded husband, the man driven to extremes by betrayal. And when Marcus came to gloat, because he would come, he wouldn't be able to resist. They would be ready. Clara hated every second of it, hated the way Leonard had to look at her with cold disgust in front of witnesses. Hated the whispers that followed her through the Ashcombe estate, hated the performance of humiliation that Marcus's lies had forced them into. But she endured it, because the alternative was letting him win. The confrontation happened at the Duke of Richmond's ball, the social event of the season. Leonard made his announcement in front of 300 guests, his voice carrying across the ballroom like a death sentence. "I have come to inform society that I intend to seek an annulment of my marriage to Clara Whitmore on grounds of infidelity and deception. The evidence against her is irrefutable. She has dishonored my name and betrayed my trust. Effective immediately, she is no longer welcome in my household or under my protection." The ballroom erupted. Women gasped. Men muttered. Clara stood frozen in the center of it all, playing her part, the shamed wife caught in her crimes. And Marcus, standing near the back, smiled. He approached Leonard with false sympathy painted across his features. "Cousin, I'm so sorry. If I'd known sooner—" "You knew exactly what you were doing," Leonard said quietly, but his tone wasn't accusatory. It was resigned, defeated. Marcus's smile widened. "I tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen. You never do." "Where are you staying tonight?" Leonard asked suddenly. The question caught Marcus off guard. "What? You're in London for the season." "Where are you staying?" "The Langham." "Why?" Leonard glanced at Clara, still standing alone, surrounded by hostile stares. "Meet me there in an hour. We need to discuss what happens next. Settlements. Discretion. How to manage this disaster." Marcus's eyes gleamed. "Of course, whatever you need." He left the ball victorious, practically glowing. Clara waited until he was gone before approaching Leonard. Will he take the bait?
He already has. Leonard's voice was tight. Now we spring the trap. On.
The Langham Hotel was one of London's finest, all marble and gaslight and old money. Marcus had booked the best suite because of course he had. He was celebrating. Leonard arrived at the appointed time, alone. Or seemingly alone. In reality, Clara was already inside the suite, hidden in the adjoining room with a witness, Lord Wentworth, who'd agreed to help despite his misgivings. They'd bribed the hotel staff for access and set up where they could hear everything through the thin walls. Marcus greeted Leonard with brandy and false sympathy. Terrible business, all of this, but you're better off without her. Am I? Leonard accepted the drink but didn't sip it. Of course. She was poison, just like Margaret was poison. The comparison was deliberate, calculated. Leonard set down his glass. You knew Margaret well, didn't you? Very well. Marcus's voice took on a wistful quality. She was extraordinary. Wasted on you, honestly. You never appreciated her the way she deserved. And how did she deserve to be appreciated? With patience, understanding, love. Marcus poured himself more brandy. I could have saved her if you'd just let me. Is that what you were doing? Saving her? I tried, but you kept her locked away. Isolated. You drove her mad with your coldness. Leonard's hands clenched. I drove her mad? Who else? You ignored her, belittled her fragility, made her feel worthless. The flowers I sent were meant to show her someone still cared. There it was. The confession sliding out wrapped in justification. The white roses, Leonard said carefully, with black ribbons. Yes. Marcus didn't even notice he'd admitted it. A reminder that someone was mourning what you'd destroyed. And the keys to the house? The servants' passages? Marcus paused, then laughed. You didn't know about those? I had copies made years ago when Father was still alive. Easy to move through that mausoleum unseen when you know the right paths. In the adjoining room, Clara heard Wentworth's sharp intake of breath. This was enough. This was confession. But Leonard wasn't done. Margaret left a letter, he said quietly, before she died. Marcus went very still. What letter? One where she explained everything you did to her, how you tried to convince her I didn't love her, how you made her think she was losing her mind, how you wanted her to run to you for comfort. That's a lie. Is it? Leonard's voice was ice, because it sounds remarkably similar to what you're doing to Clara. The same roses, the same terror campaign, the same attempt to isolate and control. Marcus's expression shifted. The false sympathy disappeared, replaced by something ugly and raw. Clara's nothing like Margaret. Margaret was special, delicate, perfect. Clara's just a common girl playing dress-up, and yet you're trying to destroy her the same way. Because she doesn't deserve you. Marcus's voice rose. Neither of them did. You've never appreciated what you have. You take beautiful things and lock them away until they wither. Margaret died because of you, and Clara would have followed if I hadn't intervened. Intervened? You're driving her toward the same cliff. I'm trying to save her from your poison. By framing her for crimes she didn't commit? By forging letters? By turning society against her? She'll thank me eventually. When she's free of you, she'll understand. Marcus's eyes were wild now, all pretense gone. Just like Margaret would have thanked me if you hadn't kept her prisoner. Margaret threw herself off a roof because of you. The words cracked like gunfire. Marcus's face went purple. No, that was your fault. I loved her. I would have cherished her, but you married her out of spite, and when she realized what a mistake she'd made, you drove her to despair rather than let her go. I found your letters in her rooms, Leonard said. The ones you sent after we married, telling her I'd trapped her, that she'd never escape, that death was preferable to life as my wife. You whispered poison in her ear for months, and when she finally broke, you blamed me. Because it was your fault, Marcus was shouting now. If you just stepped aside, if you just let me have her, she didn't want you, she never wanted you. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marcus smiled, slow and terrible. Neither did Clara, he said softly. Not at first. But she will. Once you're ruined and cast out, once she has nowhere else to turn, she'll see that I was trying to protect her all along. And she'll be grateful. Is that what you think? It's what I know. Marcus's confidence was absolute. I've already won, Leonard. The scandal's done. Your reputation's shattered. Parliament won't support you. Your business partners are already distancing themselves. Within a month, you'll be a ghost, and Clara will be free to make better choices. Like you? Like me. Leonard stood. You're right about one thing. This is over. He crossed to the adjoining door and opened it. Clara stepped out, Wentworth behind her. Both had heard everything. Marcus's face drained of color. What? You confessed, Clara said coldly, to terrorizing Margaret, to forging evidence against me, to orchestrating this entire nightmare. And we have a witness. Wentworth nodded. Every word, Marcus. Enough to destroy you in court and in society. Marcus looked between them, understanding dawning. This was a trap. Yes, Leonard said. It was. You can't prove anything. We can prove enough. The forged letters, the financial discrepancies, and now your own admission that you had access to the house and used it to torment Margaret. Combined with her letter, it paints a very clear picture. That letter proves nothing. It proves motive. It proves intent. And it proves you're a danger. Leonard's voice was deadly quiet. You're going to withdraw every accusation against Clara. You're going to leave England, and you're going to stay gone. Because if you don't, I'll take everything we have to the authorities and the press, and you'll hang for what you did to Margaret. Marcus's hand shook. You wouldn't. She was sick. Everyone knows she was sick. She was sick because you made her that way. And I'll make damn sure everyone knows it. They stared at each other across the suite. Years of hatred and jealousy and poisonous rivalry crystallizing into this single moment. Finally, Marcus laughed. It was a broken, desperate sound. You think you've won? You think exposing me will fix anything? Society already believes Claire's guilty. Your reputation's already ruined. Even if I disappear, you'll never recover from this. Maybe not, Leonard said, but neither will you. Marcus's smile faded. He looked at Clara with something that might have been longing or might have been hatred. It was hard to tell the difference. You could have had everything, he told her. Wealth, status, freedom. All you had to do was be smart enough to choose me over him. Clara held his gaze. I'd rather burn than let you touch me. Then burn, Marcus spat. Both of you, because that's all that's left. He grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Clara felt Leonard's hand find hers, their fingers lacing together like a lifeline. Is it over? She asked quietly. Wentworth shook his head. He's right about one thing. The scandal's already out there. Even with his confession, people will believe what they want to believe. Then we give them something better to believe, Clara said. We show them the truth. All of it. Margaret's letter. Marcus's confession. The evidence of forgery. We make it public before he has a chance to disappear. That will destroy your privacy, Wentworth warned. Everything about your marriage, Margaret's death, Marcus's obsession, it'll all become public consumption. Leonard looked at Clara. Are you willing to endure that? She thought about Margaret, who died alone and terrified because no one had exposed the truth in time. Thought about every other woman who might fall into Marcus's path if they let him slink away into the shadows. Yes, she said. I'm willing. Then we do it together. They left the Langham as dawn broke over London. The city was waking up, unaware that the scandal of the season was about to become something far more dangerous. The truth. The exposé ran in every major newspaper within 48 hours. Leonard had connections in the press, and he used every single one. Margaret's letter was published in full. Wentworth's testimony about Marcus's confession was printed verbatim. The evidence of forgery was laid out in meticulous detail. The taunt erupted. Some people called it a calculated manipulation, Leonard trying to save face by throwing his cousin under a carriage. Others called it justice delayed. The arguments raged through drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs, dividing society into camps. But Clara noticed something shifting. The whispers about her changed. Instead of fortune hunter, she heard brave. Instead of manipulator, she heard survivor. And Marcus, as predicted, fled. He left England 3 days after the story broke, destination unknown. Some said France. Others said America. Claire didn't care as long as he was gone. Leonard found her in the library a week after the exposé ran, staring out the window at snow falling over the estate. How are you holding up? He asked. I don't know. She didn't turn around. Everything feels different now, like we're living in the aftermath of something we can't take back. Do you regret it? No. but I wish it hadn't been necessary. Leonard moved to stand beside her. His reflection appeared in the glass next to hers. So do I. They stood in silence, watching the snow blanket the grounds in white. Clara thought about how different this view looked now compared to her first night here, when the manor had felt like a prison and Leonard had felt like a stranger. Now it felt like home, and he felt like the only solid thing in a world that kept trying to break her.
What happens next? She asked. Leonard took her hand. We rebuild. We prove Marcus wrong. We show them that we're stronger than scandal. Together? His fingers tightened around hers. Always together. Clara finally turned to face him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of everything they'd endured. But she also saw something else. Determination, and beneath that, hope. Then let's start now, she said.
But before they could take a single step toward rebuilding, a knock echoed through the library. Mrs. Dalton entered, her face ashen.
Your Grace. Your Graces. There's someone here to see you.
Who? Mrs. Dalton's voice shook.
Lady Margaret's sister. She's traveled from Scotland, and she says she has proof that Margaret didn't jump from that roof at all. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She says Margaret was pushed, and she knows who did it.
Lady Margaret's sister stood in the entrance hall like a ghost summoned from the past. Catherine Pembroke was 43 years old, dressed in travel-worn black, her face carved with the kind of grief that never fully heals. She looked nothing like Margaret. Where the younger sister had been delicate and fair, Catherine was angular and dark. But her eyes held the same haunted quality that Leonard remembered from his first wife's final days. Clara felt Leonard go rigid beside her. His breath had stopped entirely, like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed.
Catherine, he said.
His voice was barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes locked onto him with the precision of a blade finding flesh.
Your Grace.
Then her gaze shifted to Clara, assessing.
And you must be the new Duchess, the one they're calling a fortune hunter. Clara lifted her chin. I'm the one they're calling many things, most of them lies. Good. Catherine's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Then you'll understand why I'm here. Mrs. Dalton hovered uncertainly in the doorway. Shall I prepare a room, Your Grace? Leonard hadn't moved. His entire body was locked in place, processing the impossibility of this moment. Yes, the blue room. And bring tea to the drawing room. I don't want tea, Catherine said flatly. I want the truth, and I want it now.
The drawing room felt too small with the three of them inside. Catherine refused to sit. She paced like something caged, her movements sharp and agitated. Leonard stood by the fireplace, one hand braced against the mantel, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Clara positioned herself between them, instinctively ready to intervene, though she didn't yet know what battle was about to unfold. You said Margaret was pushed, Leonard said. His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white. Explain. Catherine pulled a leather portfolio from her bag and dropped it onto the table with enough force to make Clara flinch. For 5 years I've been gathering evidence. Statements, witness accounts, medical records. Everything the original investigation ignored because it was easier to call my sister mad than admit someone murdered her. She opened the portfolio. Inside were dozens of documents, letters, photographs, all organized with obsessive precision. The official report said Margaret fell from the east wing roof during a storm, that she'd been experiencing delusions and paranoia, that she'd refused medical help, that her death was a tragic accident caused by mental instability. Catherine's fingers traced the edge of a photograph. Margaret smiling, young, alive. But there were inconsistencies no one wanted to examine because they implicated people with power. What kind of inconsistencies? Clara asked quietly. Catherine pulled out a medical examiner's report. The injuries didn't match a fall. Margaret had bruising on her wrists and upper arms consistent with being grabbed. Her neck showed signs of strangulation, and there were defensive wounds on her hands. She fought someone before she went over that edge. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Leonard's face had gone the color of ash. The examiner ruled it accidental. The examiner was paid to rule it accidental. Catherine's voice was acid. By someone with enough money and influence to make an inconvenient murder disappear. I have bank records showing a transfer of £5,000 to Dr. Harrison 3 days after Margaret's death, delivered personally by your cousin Marcus. Clara felt the pieces click into place like a gun being loaded. Marcus killed her. No. Catherine looked directly at Leonard. Marcus helped cover it up, but he didn't kill her. Then who did? Catherine pulled out another document. A witness statement from a stable hand who'd been dismissed 2 days after Margaret's death and told never to speak of what he'd seen. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the words were clear enough. The stable hand saw someone leaving the east wing the night Margaret died. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who climbed down the trellis with blood on their hands and disappeared into the storm. Leonard's breathing had gone shallow. Who? Catherine met his eyes without mercy. Your housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton. The words detonated like a bomb. Claire's mind reeled. Mrs. Dalton, the woman who'd been at Ashcombe for 23 years, who'd shown Claire her rooms on that first night, who'd helped them investigate the roses and the terror campaign, who'd been there through everything. That's impossible, Leonard said. His voice was hoarse. She had no reason. She had every reason. Catherine pulled out a bundle of letters tied with string. These are correspondence between Mrs. Dalton and Margaret from the year before Margaret died. My sister confided in her, told her about Marcus's harassment, about the roses and the keys and the constant fear, and Mrs. Dalton promised to protect her. Then why would she kill her? Because Margaret discovered something she wasn't supposed to know. Catherine laid out the final piece, a journal entry in Margaret's handwriting, dated 3 days before her death. I found Elizabeth in Leonard's study tonight, reading his private correspondence. When I confronted her, she claimed she was cleaning, but I saw the letters in her hands, financial documents, property deeds, things a housekeeper has no business touching. She looked at me with such hatred. She said I didn't deserve Leonard, that I was weak and useless and destroying everything he'd built. She said if I told him what I'd seen, she'd make sure everyone knew how mad I'd really been. I'm afraid of her, more afraid than I've ever been of Marcus. Elizabeth. Mrs. Dalton's first name. A name Clara had never heard anyone use. Leonard was shaking. Why didn't Margaret tell me? Because she was terrified. Because she thought you'd believe the housekeeper over your unstable wife. Catherine's voice cracked. And she was right to be afraid. 3 days later, she was dead. The implications were staggering. Mrs. Dalton had been in the house this entire time, had served Leonard for 5 years after murdering his first wife, had helped Clara investigate the roses while knowing exactly who was responsible because she'd orchestrated the entire thing, had stood by and watched while Marcus was blamed for crimes she'd committed. Where is she now? Catherine demanded. Where's the woman who killed my sister? Leonard moved toward the door like a man in a nightmare. Clara grabbed his arm. Wait. We need to think about this. There's nothing to think about. His eyes were black with rage. If she killed Margaret, we don't have proof. Just witness statements and circumstantial evidence. If we confront her without a plan, she'll disappear. Then what do you suggest? Clara's mind raced. The roses, the terror campaign. Mrs. Dalton had been helping them investigate. But what if she'd been controlling the entire narrative? Feeding them information. Directing their suspicions toward Marcus. Keeping them focused on external threats while she moved through the house with impunity. She's still here, Clara said slowly. She thinks she's safe. She helped us expose Marcus, probably because he was getting too close to the truth and she needed him gone. But she doesn't know we have this evidence. So we trap her, Catherine said, the same way you trapped Marcus. Leonard looked between them. You want to use Margaret's killer as bait. I want justice. Catherine's voice was steel. And if that means playing games, then we play. Clara saw the war happening behind Leonard's eyes. The man who'd spent 5 years believing he'd failed Margaret now understood he'd been betrayed by someone he'd trusted completely. Someone who'd slept under his roof, eaten his food, smiled to his face while hiding the blood on her hands. The kind of betrayal that didn't just wound, it destroyed everything you thought you knew about your own judgment. When a man loses faith in his ability to see truth from lies, he loses the foundation of power itself. Leonard had built an empire on cold calculation and ruthless assessment. Now he was learning that his greatest failure wasn't Margaret's death. It was trusting the wrong person to protect what mattered. All right, he said finally, we do it your way. But Clara, I know. She met his eyes. We end this tonight. They planned the confrontation with surgical precision. Catherine would wait in the east wing, in Margaret's old rooms. Clara and Leonard would summon Mrs. Dalton under the pretense of discussing household security following Marcus's exposure. They'd confront her with the evidence in a controlled environment where she couldn't escape or destroy documentation. Wentworth agreed to serve as witness again, positioned where he could hear everything without being seen. They weren't making the same mistakes twice. As evening fell, Clara found herself standing in Margaret's chambers for the first time since they'd discovered the roses. The rooms had been cleaned after Leonard sealed the passages, but the ghost of what had happened here still clung to the walls like smoke. Catherine stood by the window, staring out at the same view her sister had seen the night she died. She was so scared at the end, Catherine said quietly. I could hear it in her letters, the way she talked about the house closing in, about not knowing who to trust. I should have come sooner. You're here now, 5 years too late. Clara moved to stand beside her. Margaret left that letter for Leonard. She wanted him to know the truth. You're finishing what she started. Catherine's reflection in the glass was hard. I'm doing what I should have done the day she died. I should have demanded a real investigation, should have refused to accept the easy explanation. But I was grieving, and Leonard was powerful, and it was simpler to believe she'd been sick than murdered. She turned to face Clara directly. Don't make my mistakes. Don't wait 5 years to fight for the truth because you're afraid of what it might cost. I won't. Good. Catherine's eyes were fierce. Because that woman downstairs took my sister from me. And tonight, she's going to pay for it. A soft knock interrupted them. Leonard appeared in the doorway, his expression carved from stone. She's coming. Catherine nodded and moved to the adjoining room where she could listen without being seen. Wentworth was already positioned in the servants' passage they'd deliberately left unsealed for exactly this purpose. Clara and Leonard waited in the main chamber as footsteps echoed up the stairs. Mrs. Dalton entered with her usual efficiency. Your Grace. Your Grace. You asked to see me? Yes, Leonard gestured to a chair. Sit down, Elizabeth. The use of her first name made the housekeeper pause. She sat slowly, her hands folded in her lap, her expression pleasantly neutral. We've been discussing security, Leonard continued, particularly regarding the passages we sealed. Clara has concerns that we may have missed some. I can have the men do another sweep if you'd like, Mrs. Dalton offered. That won't be necessary, Leonard's voice was flat, because we know exactly who is using them. The housekeeper's face didn't change. I'm not sure I understand, Your Grace. Don't you? Clara stepped forward. You've worked here for 23 years. You know every inch of this house, every passage, every hidden door. You knew them when Margaret was alive, and you've used them since I arrived. Mrs. Dalton's eyes flickered. If you're suggesting I had something to do with those roses, I'm not suggesting anything. Clara's voice was ice. I'm stating facts. You were the one terrorizing me, just like you terrorized Margaret. That's absurd. Is it? Leonard pulled out Margaret's journal and dropped it on the table between them. Then explain this. Mrs. Dalton looked at the journal like it was a snake. Where did you get that? Margaret hid it before she died, along with a letter explaining exactly what you did to her. The housekeeper's composure cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. I don't know what lies she wrote. They're not lies. Leonard's control was fraying. You were stealing from me, reading my private correspondence. Margaret caught you, and you killed her to keep her quiet. Mrs. Dalton stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I've served this family faithfully for over 2 decades. You murdered my wife. The words echoed through the room like thunder. Mrs. Dalton went very still. Then she smiled. It was the coldest thing Clara had ever seen. Your wife was a weak, pathetic creature who didn't deserve the title. She had everything, wealth, status, a husband who would have given her the world, and she spent every day crying and claiming to see ghosts. She was wasting everything you'd built. So you decided to remove her, Clara said. I decided to solve a problem. Mrs. Dalton's voice was matter-of-fact. She was going to destroy you, Leonard. Her instability was becoming public. The whispers were starting. Your business partners were questioning your judgment. She was a liability that needed to be eliminated. By throwing her off a roof, Leonard said through gritted teeth, by giving her a choice. Mrs. Dalton's eyes were hard. I told her she could leave quietly, go to an asylum, disappear. I didn't care. But she refused, said she'd tell you everything, that you'd believe her over me. So I made the decision for her. Clara felt sick. You strangled her first, only enough to subdue her. The fall did the rest. And when it was done, I made sure the evidence pointed to suicide.
paid off the examiner, convinced everyone she'd been mad. It was remarkably easy, actually. People believe what they want to believe. And Marcus? Why involve him? Mrs. Dalton laughed. Marcus was a convenient scapegoat. He'd been harassing Margaret for months. It wasn't hard to redirect suspicion his way. The roses were his idea originally, so I simply continued the tradition when your new wife arrived. Why? Leonard's voice broke. Why terrorize Clara? Because she's just like Margaret. Young, weak, a distraction from what matters. You were finally starting to focus on the estate again, on building your legacy, and then she appeared and undid all that progress. I couldn't let history repeat itself. So you tried to drive me mad, Clara said. I tried to make you leave. Mrs. Dalton's tone was almost pitying. If you'd just accepted the settlement and disappeared, none of this would have been necessary. But you're more stubborn than Margaret was. So I had to escalate. By framing her, Leonard said. By helping us investigate your own crimes. It was elegant, really. Mrs. Dalton sounded proud. I fed you just enough truth to keep you focused on Marcus while I controlled the narrative. And when Marcus confessed and fled, I thought that would be the end of it. Clara would eventually leave out of fear or boredom, and you'd finally be free to focus on what actually matters. What matters? Clara's voice shook with rage. Leonard's life, his happiness, the estate. Mrs. Dalton's eyes blazed. This house, this legacy, it's bigger than any individual marriage. I've devoted my entire adult life to protecting it. I've sacrificed everything, my youth, my prospects, my own chance at family, to serve the Ashcombe name. I won't let it be destroyed by foolish women who don't understand what they have. The confession hung in the air like poison. Catherine stepped out from the adjoining room, her face white with fury. You killed her because you were jealous. Mrs. Dalton spun toward her, shock breaking through her composure for the first time. I'm Margaret's sister, and I've been listening to every word, as has Lord Wentworth, who's currently documenting your confession for the authorities. Wentworth emerged from the passage, his expression grim. Every word, Elizabeth, including the part where you admitted to murder. Mrs. Dalton's face cycled through emotions, shock, fear, calculation, then settled on something that looked almost like relief. You can't prove any of this. It's my word against a dead woman's journal and the testimony of grieving relatives with an obvious bias. We have the witness statement from the stable hand, Catherine said. We have the medical evidence. We have bank records showing you received payments from Marcus to help cover up the crime. And now we have your confession, obtained under duress. Any magistrate will throw it out, not when 3 separate witnesses corroborate it. Leonard's voice was deadly quiet. You're finished, Elizabeth. For a long moment, nobody moved. The housekeeper stood surrounded by the evidence of her crimes, the truth she'd hidden for 5 years finally exposed. And Clara saw something shift in the woman's expression, a calculation, a decision being made in real time. Mrs. Dalton's hand moved to her pocket. Leonard saw it a split second before Clara did. He lunged forward as the housekeeper pulled out a small pistol, the kind women carried for protection against highwaymen. The shot rang out like the end of the world. Clara screamed as Leonard crashed into Mrs. Dalton, driving her backward into the wall. The gun clattered across the floor. Wentworth scrambled to retrieve it while Catherine rushed to Clara's side. Leonard had Mrs. Dalton pinned against the wall, one hand around her wrist, his face inches from hers. You're going to hang for what you did, he said. Each word was a death sentence. And I'm going to watch. Mrs. Dalton laughed. It was a broken, desperate sound. You think this ends with me in chains? You think justice will fix what's broken? She's already won, Leonard. Margaret's already destroyed you. You'll never trust anyone again, never let anyone close. You'll die alone in this house, surrounded by ghosts, and it'll be exactly what you deserve. Wrong, Clara said. She stepped forward and looked Mrs. Dalton directly in the eyes. He's not alone anymore, and he's not broken. You tried to destroy him the same way you destroyed Margaret, but you failed, because we're stronger together than you ever were alone. Mrs. Dalton's expression twisted with hatred. You stupid girl, you have no idea what you've married into. This house eats people like you. In 5 years, you'll be just as mad as Margaret was, and he'll be looking for wife number 3. No, Leonard said. His voice was absolute. In 5 years, she'll still be here, and you'll be forgotten. He nodded to Wentworth. Send for the constables. As Wentworth left to summon the authorities, Catherine moved to stand beside Clara. Together they watched as the woman who'd murdered Margaret and terrorized Clara sat in the same chair where she'd probably planned both crimes, her face empty of everything except defeat. The constables arrived within the hour. Mrs. Dalton was taken into custody without resistance, her confession documented by 3 witnesses and supported by years of hidden evidence. As they led her out of the manor, she looked back at Leonard one final time. "You'll regret this," she said. "You'll regret choosing her over everything I did for you." Leonard didn't respond. He simply closed the door and locked it. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine stood in the entrance hall, clutching Margaret's journal to her chest like a talisman. "It's done. After 5 years, it's finally done." "Thank you," Leonard said quietly, "for not giving up. She deserved better than to be forgotten." Catherine's eyes were wet. She deserved justice. She got it because of you. Catherine nodded slowly. Then she looked at Clara. "Take care of him. Don't let this house destroy him the way it tried to destroy Margaret." "I won't."
After Catherine left for her hotel, promising to return for the trial, Clara and Leonard stood alone in the manor that had been the stage for so much tragedy. The house felt different now, emptier, like something essential had been carved out of its foundations. Leonard moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching furniture, staring at portraits, trying to reconcile the home he thought he knew with the crime scene it had actually been. Clara found him in the study, standing before the fireplace where he'd been the night she first met him. He looked older now, worn down by revelations that kept cutting deeper. "She killed Margaret because she was jealous," he said without turning around. "All this time I thought I'd failed to protect my wife from Marcus or from her own mind. But the real threat was sleeping under my roof, eating at my table, someone I trusted completely." "You couldn't have known." "I should have." His hands clenched. "I prided myself on seeing through people, on reading motivations and predicting behavior, and I was blind to a murderer for 5 years. Elizabeth was good at hiding. She spent 2 decades building that mask, and it almost killed you too. But it didn't." Clara moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "We caught her. We exposed her. And she's going to pay for what she did."
"Is that enough?" Leonard's voice was raw. "Does justice for Margaret somehow make up for 5 years of believing I drove her to suicide? Does punishing Elizabeth erase the fact that I brought you into this house and almost let you suffer the same fate?" Clara took his face in her hands. "Listen to me. What happened to Margaret was not your fault. What almost happened to me was not your fault. The only person responsible is the woman sitting in a cell right now. But if I'd been more careful, you'd still be human, still fallible, still capable of being deceived by someone who spent 23 years perfecting their lies." She held his gaze. "You're not a god, Leonard. You're just a man trying to protect the people you love. And sometimes that's not enough to stop evil from touching your life." His eyes searched hers for absolution he didn't deserve and she couldn't give. Because forgiveness wasn't something you received. It was something you learned to carry. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We survive. We rebuild. We prove that Elizabeth was wrong about us." "How?" "By refusing to let what happened define us. By choosing each other every single day. By making this house into something other than a monument to tragedy." Leonard pulled her close, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. And maybe she was. Because power and wealth and titles meant nothing when you were drowning in the wreckage of everything you'd failed to protect. But love, real love, the kind built on shared survival and stubborn refusal to break, that was something worth fighting for. They stood together in the study as night fell over Ashcombe Manor. Outside, snow had started falling again, blanketing the grounds in white. Inside, 2 people who'd married as strangers held each other and tried to imagine a future where the ghosts finally stopped screaming. The trial would come. Society's judgment would come. The endless scrutiny and whispered speculation would come. But for tonight, they had this. Each other. The truth finally exposed. And the fragile, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real from the ashes of everything that had burned. Clara felt Leonard's heartbeat against her cheek, steady and strong despite everything. Felt his arms around her, protective and desperate in equal measure. And she understood with perfect clarity that this was what it meant to love someone. Not the romantic fantasy society sold, but the gritty reality of standing beside another human when the entire world was trying to tear them apart. She was about to speak when footsteps echoed from the hallway, rapid, urgent.
Wentworth burst through the door, his face ashen. "Leonard, Clara, you need to hear this immediately. What is it?" "Mrs. Dalton. She's confessed to the constables about Margaret's murder, but she also confessed to something else." "What?" Wentworth's voice shook. "She's not working alone. There's someone else involved, someone who's been manipulating events from the beginning, someone who orchestrated everything. Marcus's obsession, the terror campaign, even your marriage." Clara felt ice flood her veins. "Who?" Before Wentworth could answer, a new voice spoke from the doorway behind him. "That would be me." They all turned. Standing in the entrance to the study, illuminated by lamplight and smiling with terrible satisfaction, was someone Clara had never seen before, but Leonard clearly recognized. His face went white as death. "Father," Leonard whispered, "you're supposed to be dead." The man's smile widened. "I found that being dead is remarkably useful when you want to control your empire without interference. And Leonard, we have so much to discuss about what you've done to my legacy." The man standing in the doorway was 70 years old but moved with the predatory grace of someone half his age. Harold Ashcombe, the previous duke, had been declared dead in a carriage accident 10 years prior. His funeral had drawn half of Parliament. Leonard had inherited the title at 29 and spent a decade believing he'd buried his father. Now that father stood before him, very much alive, and smiling like a man who just won a game nobody else knew they were playing. "You look surprised," Harold said. His voice was cultured, smooth, the kind of voice that had commanded empires and destroyed rivals. "Did you really think I'd leave my legacy in the hands of a boy too weak to protect it?" Leonard's entire body had gone rigid. Clara could feel the tremor running through him, not fear, but the kind of rage that came from being betrayed by the one person you'd mourned. "You've been alive this entire time." "Of course." Harold stepped into the room like he owned it, which, legally, he probably still did in ways Clara couldn't begin to fathom. "The accident was staged. Expensive, but necessary. I needed to remove myself from public scrutiny while I rebuilt our fortune from the shadows. You were losing money on bad investments, making sentimental decisions, letting emotions cloud your judgment. Someone had to take control. So you faked your death and let me grieve. Grief builds character." Harold's eyes were cold. "And you needed building. You were too soft, too willing to compromise, too concerned with being liked instead of being feared." Wentworth had gone pale. "Your Grace, the Elder, Your Grace, this is madness. You can't simply reappear after a decade and expect—" "I don't expect anything." Harold cut him off. "I take what's mine. This estate, this title, this family's reputation. All of it has been mine to control since the day Leonard was born." Clara found her voice. "You've been manipulating everything. The marriages, the deaths, all of it, not all of it." Harold's gaze shifted to her, assessing and dismissive in the same glance. Elizabeth acted on her own initiative when she killed the first wife. Overzealous loyalty, but ultimately unnecessary. Margaret would have destroyed herself eventually without help. She was weak stock, poor breeding. The casual cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. Leonard took a step forward. "You knew Elizabeth murdered Margaret, and you did nothing. I rewarded her." Harold smiled. "She eliminated a problem and ensured you could make a more strategic second marriage. Though I must say, I'm disappointed in your choice. Another nobody with debts and desperation. You could have secured a political alliance with the Hastings girl or strengthened our financial position with the Pemberton heiress. Instead, you chose this." He gestured at Clara like she was a stain on the furniture. And Wentworth could see Leonard's hands clenching, could see the violence building beneath his skin. He stepped between father and son before blood could be spilled. "Harold, you need to leave. Now. Before this becomes something nobody can walk back from. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house. The law says otherwise." Leonard's voice was deadly quiet. "You're legally dead. I inherited the title, the estate, everything. You have no claim here. Legal fictions can be corrected." Harold pulled a sheaf of documents from his coat. "I have witnesses prepared to testify that my death was staged. I have documentation proving I've been managing Ashcombe assets through intermediaries for years. And I have enough leverage over half the House of Lords to ensure my resurrection is accepted without question." He dropped the papers on Leonard's desk. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over control of the estate to me. You'll retain the title publicly to avoid scandal, but I'll make all decisions regarding finances, marriages, and business dealings. You'll do as I say when I say it, or I'll destroy you so thoroughly you'll wish you died alongside your pathetic first wife." The threat hung in the air like a noose. Clara watched Leonard's face and saw something break behind his eyes. Not his spirit, that was still intact, burning with fury, but the last fragile belief that family meant something beyond bloodlines and power. When you build your entire life on the foundation of control, you tell yourself it's for protection. That if you can just manage every variable, predict every outcome, maintain iron grip over your world, then nothing can hurt you. Leonard had learned that philosophy from the man standing before him, had internalized it so deeply that it had nearly cost him everything: Margaret, Clara, his own humanity. Now he was staring at the source of that poison and understanding with brutal clarity that control was an illusion. That power without love was just another form of slavery. That the empire his father had built was nothing but a beautiful prison that consumed everyone inside it. "No," Leonard said. Harold's smile faded. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Leonard's voice was steady. "I'm not signing anything. I'm not giving you control. And I'm not playing your games anymore. You don't have a choice." "I always have a choice." Leonard moved to stand beside Clara, taking her hand. "I choose her. I choose this marriage. I choose to build something that isn't rotted through with manipulation and cruelty. You're choosing poverty and disgrace. I'm choosing freedom." Harold's face went red. "You ungrateful fool. Everything you have, I gave you. Your title, your wealth, your position. Without me, you're nothing. Without you, I'm finally alive." The words hit like a physical blow. Harold's composure cracked. "You think this girl loves you? You think she'll stay when the money's gone and the title's worthless? She married you for the same reason the first one did, because you were a meal ticket. The moment you lose your value, she'll abandon you." Clara stepped forward. "You don't know anything about me. I know your type." Harold's sneer was venomous, desperate, grasping, willing to sell yourself to the highest bidder. You saw a wounded man and exploited his loneliness. Don't pretend this is love. It's a transaction, and you're waiting for the payout. "You're wrong," Clara said. Her voice was calm, certain. "I married him because I had no choice. I stayed because I saw who he really was beneath the armor. And I'm standing here now because I'd rather burn with him than live in comfort without him." "Pretty words." Harold dismissed her with a wave. "Let's see how pretty they sound when you're living in a cottage with creditors at the door." "Then we'll live in a cottage." Leonard's hand tightened on Clara's. "I've spent 10 years trying to live up to your impossible standards, trying to be the kind of duke you wanted me to be. Cold, ruthless, uncompromising. It nearly destroyed me. I won't do it anymore, so you'll throw away everything I built because of wounded pride." "I'm throwing away everything you built because it was built on suffering." Leonard's eyes were hard. "Margaret died because the people around me valued the estate more than human life. Clara nearly died for the same reason. How many more people have to suffer before the Ashcombe legacy is satisfied?" Harold stared at his son like he was looking at a stranger. "You've gone soft. That girl has poisoned you. She saved me." "From what?" "From becoming you." The silence that followed was absolute. Wentworth cleared his throat. "Harold, you should know that everything you've confessed tonight has been witnessed and documented. Your knowledge of Margaret's murder, your manipulation of estate finances, your threats against the current duke, all of it is grounds for prosecution. You wouldn't dare. Try me." Leonard's voice was ice. "You taught me to be ruthless, to eliminate threats without mercy. Consider this lesson learned." Harold's eyes narrowed. "If you try to have me arrested, I'll take you down with me. Every secret, every shady dealing, every corner you've cut to maintain this empire. I'll burn it all down, then burn it." Leonard met his father's gaze without flinching. "I don't care anymore. You will when you're in debtor's prison. I'll still have more than you, because I'll have her, and I'll have the truth. You'll have nothing but ashes and a legacy of cruelty." Harold looked between them, seeing the united front for the first time, seeing that his leverage had evaporated the moment Leonard chose love over power. "You'll regret this," Harold said. "Both of you." "I regret nothing," Leonard replied. "Now get out of my house." "It's my house." "Not anymore." Leonard moved to the door and opened it. 2 constables stood in the hallway. Wentworth must have summoned them while Harold was making his threats. Their presence was a statement. A line drawn. This man has confessed to conspiracy and a murder, witness tampering, and fraud, Leonard told them. I want him removed from the premises and held for questioning. You can't do this, Harold snarled. I'm the Duke of Ashcombe. No. Leonard's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I am. As the constables escorted Harold from the manor, the old man looked back one final time. His expression was twisted with rage and something that might have been grief. I gave you everything, he said, and this is how you repay me. You gave me nothing but scars, Leonard replied. I had to find everything worth having on my own. The door closed. The house fell silent. Clara, Leonard, and Wentworth stood in the study as the reality settled over them like snow. The architect of decades of suffering had been exposed. The puppet master had been cut from his strings. The game was over. And somehow, impossibly, they had won. Chet. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Mrs. Dalton was convicted of Margaret's murder and sentenced to hang. She went to the gallows without remorse, insisting until the end that she'd done what was necessary to protect the estate. Her final words were a warning to Clara that the house would consume her eventually, just as it had consumed everyone before her. Clara didn't attend the execution. She'd seen enough death. Harold Ashcombe was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. His resurrection from the dead became the scandal of the decade. Bigger than any marriage, bigger than any murder. The revelation that he'd faked his death and manipulated his son for years destroyed what remained of the Ashcombe political influence. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He'd likely die there, forgotten and powerless. Marcus never returned to England. Rumors placed him in Paris, then Vienna, then disappeared entirely. Clara suspected he was living under an assumed name somewhere, nursing his hatred in private. She hoped he'd stay gone. The estate was nearly bankrupted by the legal fees and the revelations of Harold's embezzlement. Leonard had to sell properties, dismiss staff, liquidate investments. The empire contracted to a fraction of its former size, and somehow, impossibly, they were happier for it. But spring came slowly to Ashcombe Manor. Clara stood in the garden watching the first buds push through half-frozen ground, marveling at the stubborn persistence of life. The estate grounds were smaller now. They'd sold off the northern acres to pay debts. But what remained was theirs. Truly theirs. No longer haunted by ghosts or puppet masters or the crushing weight of legacy. She heard footsteps on the gravel path and turned to find Leonard approaching. He looked different these days. Lighter, somehow. The hard edges had softened not into weakness, but into something more sustainable. The kind of strength that came from surviving your worst fears and learning you were still standing. I've been thinking about the East Wing, he said when he reached her. Clara took his hand. We should tear it down. Actually, I was thinking we should rebuild it, turn it into something new. Maybe a conservatory, or a library. Something Margaret would have loved. That's a good idea. Leonard pulled her close, and they stood together watching the garden wake from winter. There was still so much work to do, repairs to make, relationships to rebuild, a future to construct from the wreckage of the past. But for the first time since Margaret's death, Leonard felt capable of the task, because he'd learned something essential in the crucible of the last months. Power wasn't about control. Legacy wasn't about perfection. Strength wasn't about never breaking. Real power came from the courage to be vulnerable. Real legacy came from choosing love over fear. Real strength came from standing back up after the world knocked you down and admitting you couldn't do it alone. Emma's coming to visit next week, Clara said. She got engaged to a lawyer. Good family, modest means. She seems happy. You made that possible. We made that possible. Leonard pressed his lips to her hair. What do you want to do with the rest of your life, Clara Ashcombe? She considered the question. A year ago, she would have said survive. 2 months ago, she would have said escape. Now standing in a garden that was slowly coming back to life, with a man who'd chosen her over everything he'd been taught to value, the answer was different. I want to build something real. A marriage. A home. Maybe a family. Something that isn't built on suffering and secrets. We can do that. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. Clara turned to face him fully, studying the face that had terrified her when they first met. She saw the scars now, literal and metaphorical, but also the determination, the stubborn refusal to let the cruelty of the past dictate the future. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Choosing me over the Empire? Every morning, Leonard said. Then I wake up and see you beside me, and I remember why I did it. That's not an answer.
Yes, it is.
His eyes were serious. I spent 39 years chasing a version of success that was designed to destroy me. Wealth without joy. Power without purpose. A legacy built on the broken backs of people I was supposed to protect. I don't regret losing that. What do you regret? That it took me so long to understand what actually mattered. That Margaret died before I learned. That you had to suffer before I woke up. Clara reached up to touch his face. We can't change the past. No. But we can choose the future. And what future do you choose? One where we're happy, where we trust each other, where we build something our children won't have to recover from. Children. The word hung between them like a promise. Is that what you want? Clara asked softly. With you? Yes. She kissed him then, slow and deliberate, tasting the future on his lips. Around them, the garden continued its patient work of rebirth. Somewhere in the house, servants were preparing dinner. In London, society was already moving on to the next scandal. But here, in this moment, there was just the two of them, and the quiet understanding that they'd survived something most marriages never faced. They'd been tested by murder and betrayal, and the systematic dismantling of everything they thought they knew about power and family, and they'd chosen each other anyway. That night they ate dinner in the small dining room instead of the grand hall. Just the two of them, simple food, conversation that meandered through plans for the garden, and updates from Emma and speculation about whether Wentworth would ever forgive them for dragging him into their chaos. He loves it, Clara said. Don't let him fool you. That man lives for drama. He's been a good friend. The best. Leonard poured more wine. I should pay him. With what money? Clara laughed, and the sound filled the room with warmth. After dinner, they walked through the manor together, room by room, cataloging what remained and what had been lost. They found Margaret's portrait in storage. Leonard had taken it down after her death, unable to bear looking at it, and decided to hang it in the library. She should be remembered, Clara said, not as a tragedy, as a person. Leonard studied his first wife's painted face. I never knew how to love her. I tried, but I didn't understand what she needed. You were young. That's not an excuse. It's not. But it's context. Clara stood beside him. You can't save people from themselves. You can only stand beside them and hope it's enough. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. And when it isn't, you forgive yourself for being human, and you honor their memory by doing better the next time. Leonard turned to her. Is that what you think I'm doing? Doing better? I think you're trying. That's all anyone can do. She was right. He knew she was right. But the guilt of failing Margaret would never fully disappear. It would just become something he carried, a weight that reminded him to be gentler, to listen harder, to never take for granted the fragile gift of another person's trust. They hung the portrait together. Margaret looked down at them with painted eyes, forever young, forever haunted, but also forever free of the suffering that had consumed her final years. I hope she's at peace, Clara said quietly. So do I. They stood in silence for a moment, paying respects to the woman whose death had inadvertently brought them together. Then they left the library and went upstairs to bed. In the darkness of their chambers, Leonard held Clara close and felt the steady rhythm of her breathing. This was what mattered, not titles or estates, or the approval of people who'd never cared about anything beyond their own advancement. This, the warmth of another body, the sound of her heartbeat, the knowledge that when morning came, she'd still be there. I love you, he said into the darkness. Clara's hand found his. I know. When did you know? When you looked at me like I was worth protecting instead of managing. When you chose me over everything else. When you let me see the parts of yourself you'd been hiding from the world. That was weeks ago. I know. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to make sure you knew it too. Leonard felt something unlock in his chest, the last piece of armor finally falling away. I know it now, he said. I love you. Not because you saved me, not because you stayed, but because you're you, and that's enough. Clara turned in his arms to face him. The moonlight painted silver across her features, making her look almost ethereal. We're going to be okay, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Leonard agreed. We are. And for the first time since Margaret's death, maybe for the first time in his entire life, he believed it. 1 year later, Clara stood in the garden holding a baby girl who had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. They'd named her Margaret Clara Ashcombe, a bridge between past and future, grief and hope. Leonard watched them from the terrace, his heart so full it physically ached. The estate was smaller now, quieter. They entertained rarely and kept their circle tight. The House of Lords had moved on to newer dukes with cleaner reputations. Society had largely forgotten them, and it was exactly the life he'd never known he wanted. Emma visited frequently with her lawyer husband, bringing warmth and laughter. Catherine Pembroke had become an unexpected friend, helping Clara navigate the intricacies of managing a household. Wentworth still appeared unannounced, bearing wine and gossip and the occasional legal crisis that needed resolving. The house was different now. Still grand, still imposing, but no longer suffocating. The ghosts had been exorcised through confession and consequence and the simple act of choosing joy over duty. Clara looked up and saw Leonard watching. She smiled, and even after a year of marriage, the sight of that smile still undid him. "Come down here," she called. "Your daughter wants you." He descended the terrace steps and crossed the garden to where his family waited. Margaret the younger gurgled happily, reaching for her father with chubby hands. Leonard took her gently, marveling as he always did at the miracle of her existence. "She looks like you when you're plotting something," Clara observed. "God help us all if she has my temperament and your stubbornness. We're doomed." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the garden. And Leonard understood in that moment what legacy truly meant. Not the preservation of wealth or title, not the ruthless accumulation of power, but this: standing in a garden with people you loved, building a future where kindness mattered more than control, where mistakes were forgiven and growth was celebrated. The Ashcombe Empire had fallen. The dynasty had fractured. The carefully constructed facade of perfection had shattered. And from the ruins, something infinitely more valuable had emerged. A family, real and flawed and utterly human. The baby fell asleep in Leonard's arms, her tiny fist curled against his chest. Clara leaned against his shoulder, and they stood together watching the sun set over the reduced estate. "Do you miss it?" Clara asked quietly. "The power, the influence." "Sometimes," Leonard admitted. "Then I remember what it cost, and I'm grateful it's gone. What do you have instead?" "Everything that matters." And he meant it. The man who'd once measured his worth in titles and properties now measured it in moments like this. In the weight of his daughter in his arms, in the warmth of his wife beside him, in the hard-won peace of knowing he'd faced the worst of himself and chosen to be better. The world would remember Harold Ashcombe as a cautionary tale. It would remember Mrs. Dalton as a murderer. It would remember Marcus as a coward. But Leonard would be remembered by the people who mattered as something else entirely. A man who'd lost everything and discovered in the losing that he'd never really had anything at all. Not until he learned to love without conditions, to trust without guarantees, to build something that couldn't be measured in ledgers or preserved in portraits. As darkness fell, they went inside together. The house was warm, filled with the ordinary sounds of life. A baby's soft breathing, the distant clatter of dishes being washed, the whisper of wind through old walls. And in that warmth, in that ordinary domesticity, Leonard Ashcombe finally found what 5 years of grief and 39 years of striving had never given him. He found home. Not in a building or a title or a legacy carved in stone, but in the arms of a woman who'd seen him at his worst and loved him anyway, in the face of a daughter who represented every hope for a better future, in the simple revolutionary act of choosing compassion over cruelty, forgiveness over vengeance, love over power. The empire had fallen, but the man had risen. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered. Years later, when people asked Clara what it was like to marry the Duke of Ashcombe, she would smile and tell them the truth, that she'd married a title and found a man, that she'd entered a prison and built a home, that she'd faced down murder and madness and the systematic cruelty of people who valued power over humanity, and emerged with something more precious than wealth or status. She'd found love, real love, the kind that survived scandal and loss, and the complete dismantling of everything you thought you knew about the world. And Leonard, when asked the same question, would take Clara's hand and say simply, "I married the woman who taught me that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking completely and choosing to rebuild yourself into something better than you were before." The Duke and Duchess of Ashcombe lived quietly after that, They raised their daughter and eventually 2 more children in a house no longer haunted by ghosts. They rebuilt the estate slowly, carefully, with an emphasis on sustainability over splendor. They proved that love measured not by age or circumstance or the approval of society, but by the person who stood beside you when everything else fell apart was the only kind worth having. And as the lights of Ashcombe Manor glowed warmly through countless winter nights to come, they became a different kind of legend. Not the cautionary tale Harold had wanted, but a testament to the radical idea that even in the darkest houses, even after the worst betrayals, even when everything seemed irredeemably broken, hope could take root, love could survive. And 2 people who'd married as strangers could build something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy them. That was their legacy. And it was enough.